All right, and we are live. Hello, everyone. This is My Two Cents, and welcome back to my channel. I do apologize for the lack of podcasts I've had. I'm pretty sure the last one I did was right before the election, so it's been a little while, although I've had a lot going on between Thanksgiving, Christmas, and everything else that's going on. Do hope everyone had a happy Thanksgiving, a Merry Christmas. For my few Jewish followers, Happy Hanukkah. But getting back to it right now and getting to a podcast here that I've been wanting to do for a while, but just now was able to work it out. So I'm joined today by Rob of Upwardthought. He has his own channel of the same name and is also a user on X. I initially found him during my Twitter spat with the user Based Zillennial, which those of you who follow the podcast know I already did one podcast where I reviewed her tweets. And then I had also challenged her to debate me on the podcast, to which she said she wanted to, but then ultimately backed out of it, calling me a creep and blocking me on X. That being said, Rob shared an excellent video he made that was very pertinent to the subject, so we're going to talk about that. But before we get going, Rob, go ahead and introduce yourself. Let everyone know what your YouTube channel is all about, and then we'll get into the discussion.
Yeah, that's a not as easy a question as it might seem. So my name's Rob. The channel's Upwardthought. And I guess the purpose of the channel is to help people find ways that they can improve their own lives and the lives of those they care about. I am a Christian. I'm a devoted disciple of Jesus Christ. And we kind of just go no holds barred there and whatever kind of topics I think might be relevant to the modern age. So.
All right, excellent. As all my viewers know, I am a Christian as well. My channel isn't strictly a Christian channel, although certainly being a Christian, the topic overlaps in every aspect of my life and comes out, especially in when it comes to the issues of relationship, family, and where society's going. Now, just for your sake, I'll let you know, when I first started my channel, I made mostly content about economics and supporting free markets. And that still is my passion, although over time I've gotten to discuss a lot of relationship issues in virtue of the fact that I think a lot of the governmental, political, and economic problems we're suffering in America today stem from the fact that we no longer have strong families. We no longer have strong families in virtue of the fact that fewer and fewer people are getting married. And of course, the question then is, why are fewer and fewer people getting married? Now, there's a lot of, because I would say there's a lot of problems in society that need fixing, but until we actually have strong families again, a lot of those the solutions start in the home and with the family. And if we aren't forming strong families, obviously that's a problem. So I've sought to answer really why are people no longer getting married? And I'd say a lot of it has to do with government policy and male and female nature that have been brought together to bring the perfect blend that unfortunately degrades men and exploits the worst aspects of female nature. But I will say that first, being someone who grew up in church, and I'll ask you if you have a similar experience, I didn't really see it at the time, but I remember going to church youth group and learning about supposedly being taught about relationships from a biblical Christian standpoint. And as a young man, I remember once a year at least when I was in high school during youth group, they would split the boys and the girls up. And in the men's section, we would talk about the evils of pornography and how we as men are just animals and fundamentally evil. And we inherently treat women poorly. And as Christian men, we've got to do better, because if we Christian men were just better, then women would be better too. And really, when we see women behaving poorly in society, it's not emblematic that there's anything wrong with women. It shows that it's really a lack of strong Christian men standing up and doing the right thing. Meanwhile, after that, I would go and talk to my female friends who had just been separated and had their own little powwow for all the females. And I asked, what did you guys talk about? And they told me, we learned that modern beauty standards are fake and we're perfect just the way we are. We're so beautiful and wonderful. And God just has such a wonderful plan for our lives. And any man would be lucky enough to have us. And again, I think, that is in a Christian context, but I think even outside a Christian context, this is a sentiment that has caught on among almost all young women in the Western world. And this idea that they are just perfect angels sent from God to earth. Further, God, or whatever they believe in, has assured them that they will get married. They don't even need to ask the question, am I good enough to be someone's wife? if anything, men need to ask if they're good enough for them, but they take it as a given that they are good enough to get married, and further, they are owed a husband by God or whatever it is they believe in that is both what they're looking for emotionally and religiously and financially, but also someone they are very attracted to, which involves a number of things, but ultimately comes down to a combination of being good looking, strong, making money, that kind of thing. And I would just be curious, have you had a similar experience, especially among Christian women, but also just women in the West in general?
Yeah, absolutely. So my journey as a Christian began when I was 18, so I was a little later to the game. But that kind of entitlement is definitely something that I've seen. I think modern men and women each have their own class of problems that we could all be better at. But that completely resonates with me, this sense that women are taught in church or outside that they can do no wrong. It's very much a one-sided game. And so my approach with this topic is similar to you, coming at it from sort of a more general perspective. And I will say, I do not think that things are going to get back on track. So my tack is more, are there people out there who, individuals who are willing to step up to maybe a more accurate picture of reality? And it's kind of a Noah's Ark situation. Can we at least help a couple of people figure it out? I didn't have a whole ton of male mentorship when I was growing up. And I think whoever we are, if we figured out something the hard way, or we've just learned things along the way, that we have a responsibility to try to help others. That's pretty clear in Titus 2. And it's both for the men and the women. But yeah, absolutely one-sided. And there's really no discussion of, in churches in general, there's a pattern where the sins that are talked about are the ones that the people who go to that church don't do, right? That's the general pattern. They never talk about the stuff that those people are doing. And then you can zoom into that further, and it's almost never the case that women are taught about sins that women do. It's very one-sided. So
Exactly. And I think it's never, my experience, especially when it comes to the female side of things, is it's never explicitly said, but women are effectively taught that they can't sin. And that's not to say that they don't do things that are wrong, but basically the message is, if and when women sin, it's because a man in her life failed her. If she's
and it's not as bad.
Yep, exactly.
It's like we don't do it, but if we do it, it's a man's fault. And even if it's not as bad.
Exactly. If she's still in high school, well, her father clearly failed as a Christian father. If he just stepped up to the plate and done things right, she never would have made that mistake. If she's an adult, it's because her, Christian friends, or if she's married, her husband failed. I mean, I have legitimately seen, I'm sad to say this, but cases where a wife committed adultery. She cheated on her husband, and the husband was then told by the pastor he needed to look in the mirror. Clearly, this is evidence of his failure, because if he had just been leading the marriage properly, as loving her as Christ loves the church, there's no way she would have stepped out on him like this. Now, I'm not opposed in any situation. I think it does behoove each of us as individuals. Obviously, we can't control other people. So yes, looking in the mirror, did I do something wrong, is not a wrong question to ask, but it's ridiculous to assert that he's 100% at fault for what his wife did. She is still an individual and capable. Women are, in fact, individuals capable of making their own choices. And I think it's actually a far more disrespectful and frankly childish view of women to treat them like they can't make decisions and they can't be responsible for the decisions that they make.
Agreed.
Anyways, but I do like what you said about it kind of being a Noah's Ark situation, in that, culture is very far gone. We're not really going to talk about this so much on this show, but I've talked about on other podcasts, the legal system has really been messed up to the point that I have to say, I think marriage and family is a good thing and is a net positive for society. The family law has its fingers so deeply into the issue of family today that unfortunately a great many young men may not be able to find a woman who can who you can trust to stay married to you and hold the same values as you, given how hard family law has shifted in her direction to incentivize her to divorce. That's a problem. As a result, the trend is going to continue. People are, I predict the rate of people getting married are going to go down. The birth rate is going to decline. The best we can do is those individuals that we can help get to a place where they can have a God-honoring traditional family with traditional values will hopefully come out the other side, get out of the ark unscathed and be able to rebuild society, if you will. So I do like that. But here I'd like to talk about what I think the message needs to be, both to young men but particularly young women. And I thought your video, Christian Singles, Stop Doing This to Yourself, explained it very well. And kind of from the standpoint of, and not that you were explicitly doing this, but I thought it explained what every father needs to tell his sons and daughters. And that is about, if you're looking to get married, here are the things you need to look for. And further, what you need to be realistic about something. And I'd say, just to give an example, I think this is easier to do with men because everyone already knows, men by and large in the world we live in are already told they are not special snowflakes that have it all together and they automatically deserve the best of the best. And if you're meant to have a teenage boy in your home who comes to you and says, I'm looking for a wife and here are the characteristics, she's got to be tradition. She's got to have traditional values. She's got to be a good Christian girl. She must be no taller than 5'6" with long blonde hair, natural double D's, 23-inch waist, and it just lists off all these supermodel essentially level characteristics from her physical of her physical appearance, along with values and everything else. I think just about everyone, whether it's their father, their youth pastor, is going to throw their head back, laugh hysterically, and say, young man, you are absolutely delusional. The amount of women out there that meet all those characteristics is so infinitesimally low. And further, even if you found her, you got to ask the question, why is she going to pick you? I mean, a girl like that has options. So why do you think she is going to pick you out of all the options she has available? Why?
And in most cases, it wouldn't even, that conversation would never even have to happen because men from a very young age, even with their own mothers, are taught lesson after lesson that their value in life is based on the value they add.
Exactly.
I mean, it happens from day one. Whereas the training on the female side is the opposite, that they have intrinsic value, like we discussed earlier.
Exactly. So the question I put to you there, suppose you have a daughter who's 12 to 15 years old. She's not quite old enough that she's going to start dating yet, but you want to have that conversation with her, explain to her how she needs to go about this. How would you explain that to her like you did in that video?
Yeah, well, it's a kind of a cheat code, but I spend a lot of time making these videos on the YouTube channel. It's Upward Thought without the underscore. The underscore is how to find me on Twitter. But one of the benefits of spending the time making these videos is that my kids don't have to wonder what I believe. On demand, they can watch what I would tell them sitting down face to face. But what I would tell my daughter, what I have told her, and because I do have a daughter, and what I will continue to tell her is that the world doesn't owe her anything, and that it's a two-way competition. So in the presentation you're referring to, which is, I think it's called "To the Christian Singles Waiting on God, Stop Waiting."
And just quickly for everybody watching right now, I have linked to that video in this stream. So if you go down in the description, you can find the video.
Yeah, so one of the salient points of the presentation was that these laundry lists that modern women have, there's nothing inherently wrong about it, but there is something wrong with not stopping and asking, well, if I found a guy like this, what would his list be? And that's something that I try to teach my daughter is, think about the kind of guy that you want to marry and think about the kind of woman you need to become to deserve a guy like that. Oops.
Absolutely. And I would say, unfortunately, because so many young women take it as a given, they take it as a given that God has promised them a husband. Now, interestingly enough, this is something that many women, and I'll say it again, it's not exclusively a Christian woman's problem, but especially among Christian communities, I found many young women repeat that specific claim. God has promised me a husband. Yeah. Now, I have in many, many discussions, both on Twitter, or excuse me, X, and in real life, I've asked, can you cite for me a scripture that specifically says God has promised every faithful Christian woman a husband? To date, I have not had a single one present me a scripture that says that. Now, granted, I've gotten some kind of off the wall scriptures. I forget the exact psalm, but someone did once state for me, delight yourself in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. Well, all you have to do is open up that song, read the entire thing in context, and you'll realize what that verse is about the psalmist David saying he has sinful desires in his heart, which he wishes to overcome. If you delight yourself in the Lord, he will help you overcome those sinful desires. So that doesn't have anything to do with God being a genie that you rub the lamp and he gives you the desires of your heart. But in any case, they take it as I bring that up to point out this idea isn't actually biblical. There is, the Bible, when it comes to the Bible's instructions on getting married, they're essentially, and I have a tweet thread that I've posted before that summarizes this in detail, but essentially between the letters of Paul and everything else that is discusses the issue of marriage, he says, 1, don't be unequally yoked with unbelievers. 2, he says, I think it would be better if people remained unmarried, like in Paul's case he was, but if you burn with passion, then it's better to marry, and then you can't get divorced. And pretty much that's all the only guidelines that are given. It doesn't say you are promised a husband anywhere. It says you can marry. So as a Christian woman or a Christian man, you have the option to either marry an eligible member of the opposite sex or choose to remain single. And frankly, whatever decision you make, so long as it's your decision, and you're doing it because that's what you want, I applaud you. But this idea that you are promised a particular spouse with particular characteristics just is not a biblical idea.
I'd go further and say it's anti-biblical. It's anti-Christ. If you believe that Jesus is the epitome of justice, I mean, if you carry this same principle forward and you apply it to other things, that if we just want something, he's a genie. That's what he becomes, is a genie. Rub the lamp. Now, the good thing about that principle is if you live it out in any other way in your life, you can test it very quickly and see that it's rubbish, right? And then
Absolutely.
so you don't have to wait 9 years or 10 years or 20 years and say, oh, I'm waiting on God. Well, go do that with something else and see if it works out. Like, see if your next meal, if you can just wish it. If you really desire it, will God just plop it in front of your face? No. So we live in a creation that is bound by law. There's cause and effect. And you can say it's all designed by God, but we have a menu before us at all times. And maybe we don't have the options super clear in our heads, but it's ours to choose and then pay the price. And so when it comes to the options that these ladies have, and I talked about it in that video, and the guys have to do the same thing. What's your market value? It's the price that the other person is willing to pay. So we are as good as the quality of the most valuable member of the opposite sex who's interested in you. That's your value. In the market, the dating market, that's your value. So it's not something you get to decide. You don't get to decide if you're a 5 or a 10 or an 8 or whatever. You can decide what's important to you. And then you look down the menu and then you decide if that's, if you have $5 for dinner and that's what you have, you don't get to pick a $10 dinner, right? And you can't say, well, I'm just waiting on God to get this $10 dinner. If he gives you a path to become that kind of a person, because we're not just talking about looks here, you can improve yourself. If you're a guy, you can find ways to earn more money. You can get more fit. You can become more wise. You can become more self-controlled. But there's some things you can't change, and it's the same for women. We can't make ourselves younger. We can't, it's pretty limited how much we can do to change our genetically determined looks, right? And on and on. And so you look at the list and you say, well, is this someone that I am willing to seal the deal with or not? And that circles back to what you were saying that Paul said. Marriage is one of the most incredible blessings, maybe the most incredible thing that a person can do with their lives. Having kids is I don't know how anything else can approach that. If you can find the right person. And what I hope people realize, and this comes back to, I don't think we can solve this problem. We can just guide the people who are willing to take the guidance to imagine this not as this limitless field of every single possibility you could imagine, but this search, this hunt for a very rare specimen. In this case, if you're a man, you need to realize that a woman worth marrying is extraordinarily rare today. And if you're a woman, you need to realize that the kind of guy that would give you the life that you think you want is extremely rare. And until people start being realistic about that, there's just going to be a lot of unhappiness.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up the issue of age there vaguely. So I want to bring that into the discussion as well. Now, obviously, I disclaimer at this point, whenever I have these discussions on X, and certainly it was the case in my discussion with Base Millennial, the moment I start bringing up the importance of age, someone chimes in, "You're saying women have an expiration date." And to be quick, to say quickly, no, I am not saying people, quote unquote, have an expiration date, or that if you pass a certain age, it is now impossible that you will ever find a mate. But what is important to note is that the clock is ticking. When you become an adult, the clock for both men and women effectively does start to tick when it comes to settling down. And it's going to tick much faster for women in terms of the things that are most important to men. Now, I think one very unfortunate trend I've seen in the church, but outside it as well, is this idea that women believe they have essentially all the time in the world to get married. Now, you have to remember what men are looking for in a wife. There are three primary things that attract them. Obviously, it shouldn't just be this, but when it comes to a man being attracted to a woman, youth, beauty, and fertility are very important. But when you think about it, youth and beauty are really just signifiers for fertility. So if you want to dial it down, when it comes of those three things, really the fertility is extremely important, in as much as most men, if they're going to settle down, get married, and have families, they want to have children. Now, does that change the fact that some couples turn out to be infertile and still go on to have successful marriages? No. Does it change the fact that some couples do marry when they're older and still go on to have successful marriages? No. Such cases exist. But again, by and large, in society, if we're going to keep procreating and building successful family units, the ability to have children is very important to that. And women cannot wait forever to settle down if they actually want to have children. And what I've seen quite often is women neglect the fact that, by and large, and a mountain of academic research verifies this, but men find women in their early 20s to be the most attractive. That doesn't mean that once a woman turns 30, she automatically becomes ugly, but it is to say that, all other things being equal, a woman is more attractive to more men at age 20 than she is at age 30. And especially young women in their early 20s feel like they have all the time in the world. They can't find anyone to settle down with, or they feel they can't find anyone who deserves them. As they reach 28, 29, 30 years old, they won't admit it publicly, but they'll start to see that they're getting fewer messages on Facebook. They're getting fewer responses to the selfies they post on Instagram. And in their personal life, the amount of men that used to approach them at the bar to buy their drinks or whatever are starting to get less. Now, again, they won't admit it publicly, but instinctively they can see my options are starting to shrink. So actually the average age of first marriage in America in the year 2023 was age 30. That goes to show me women are starting to settle down primarily when their youth, beauty, and fertility are on the decline. More and more women marrying at that age. Again, it's not impossible to have children, but those that do have trouble with fertility, I used to work in a hospital, so I've seen women walking out of the hospital crying after being informed by their doctor, that if you had tried to start having children when you were younger, maybe we could have diagnosed this and fixed it. But now that you're 30, 31, 32, there's very little we can do. And we've discovered you're infertile now, and because it's so much later, there's not a lot we can do about it. And they go on to be, often many of those marriages end in divorce because they feel like they settled and they inherently deserve more. But that's a long-winded explanation to point out that if they'd been more deliberate about getting married when they were young, they could have ended up with a guy who may not have been everything they were looking for, but was at least someone they could have learned to love and they could have had children with. Because they wait so long, they end up settling in their own mind. And, you know, I don't believe there really is such a thing as settling, because whoever you choose to marry, that is effectively the best person you could do. But they end up not being able, either struggling to have children or having fewer children because they're older and less fertile, and because they are with someone that's even less attractive than the people they dated or had access to in their youth. They end up being even more unhappy, feeling like they deserve better because of all their past relationships. So I think it does go to show when mentoring young women, you have to let them know, when you're young, when you're 20, 21, 22 years old, you need to do a hard, honest look in the mirror and say, the guys that are interested in you right now, the odds that if you wait, a better option comes along are not very good. Odds are the highest quality men are going to be interested in you at this point in your life. So I'd let you, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, you said a lot there, and I think a lot of it's worth rehashing. So first, let's start at the end, if you don't mind. So my advice that I've given in that video, I've actually done a whole series. I have a playlist for women on the channel. But my advice is, if you are a woman and you want to get married, look around you, which you obviously have already done, and come to grips with the fact that if you don't think any of those people are significant enough to marry, or vice versa, because obviously maybe you like one of them and they don't like you, the question is, what are you going to do about it? And that's never a question that people ask themselves, because you have just a few choices. You think that your choice is, well, I'll just wait and I'll rub my genie lamp and God will magically make the man of my dreams appear. It's not going to happen. So either you lower your standards, because as has been said, it's not settling if you're, the person who's attracted to you determines the standard, right? It's people who use the word settle are a lot like people who use the word arrogant, because it's almost always the opposite, right? So if someone's talking about settling, it's probably the other person who's settling, not you.
Exactly. I would just use this example. I have bought and sold properties before, and anyone who has knows it can be a frustrating process because you're trying to make a profit on the property you're selling.
Right.
And this goes to control the price. Yeah, exactly. This goes with any product, but the housing market goes up and down, and unfortunately, that property you're trying to sell is only worth what someone else is willing to pay for it. You may want to sell it for $300,000 because you need to sell it for that much in order to make a profit. But as people are reviewing the house, exactly, they start giving bids and you're getting 150, 200,000. Well, I hate to break it to you, buddy, but the market just communicated to you, your house is not worth $300,000. You can try to sell it for that much, but if no one's willing to pay, then that's it.
So, and no one's like I maybe someone is. I'm not saying that women or men should marry people that they don't really want to get married to. Don't do it, right? Marriage is hard enough on easy mode. It's hard enough when you're head over heels for somebody, right? So I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, get realistic about what you want and what the price is. So in your immediate area of people you already know, if there's no marriage prospect there, the question is, what are you going to do about it? There's not a whole ton that a young woman can do to improve her marketability. Guys differ in that. But the next step is go somewhere else, right? You can change your job. You can move to a different place. But there's an option that no one talks about, and that is look for a high quality man. And again, there are a lot of discussions about this on my channel, but a significant difference between an attractive prospect that's female and an attractive prospect that's male is that the male is going to emit things that are visible at a distance. You can go to a networking event, some kind of professional meeting or chamber of commerce or something, and all of those guys are successful. You can get a job as a teller at a bank, and all the guys coming in, you'll be able to see if they're married or not when you pull up their account. You can see if they're attractive. You can even see how much money they have, right? There's nothing a guy can do that's equivalent to that to find a high quality woman. And in the modern world, it's even harder because of Me Too and this and that and whatever. You have to be a moron to hit on women at work. It's very unwise. But what are you going to do to go find, like, unless you church hop or, you know, whatever the secular equivalent is, but people look at you funny for doing things like that. So on the one hand, the onus is more on the woman today than it's ever been before. And it's easier for her, not harder than ever before, but it's very countercultural. And these are things that need to be talked about more often.
Absolutely. And again, I'd say the difference between the man and the woman in that case is, you know, if the woman is, as you mentioned, 20, 21 years old, and she can't find anyone in her immediate area, not to say you need to rush the decision or marry someone quickly without proper vetting. But again, she needs to understand, like, if I'm mentoring a young man who's 20 years old and really struggling to find women who are attracted to him, I could advise him that, if you know, it's not a given that you're going to be more attractive when you're older, but if you continue to hit the gym, if you continue to work hard in your career, if you continue to grow wiser, smarter, stronger, odds are at 30 years old, you will be much more attractive to more women than you are right now at 20 years old. The reverse is not true for women. It is not the case that if you're 20 years old and you can't find someone attracted to, well, and I'm not going to say you can't find someone who's attracted to you, because odds are, if you're a 20-year-old woman, there are in fact men attracted to you. But if you can't find a man that you believe is worth marrying, you need to understand that your odds do not get better with time. Like, if you're going to consider moving to a different church, going to one of these conferences you talked about, going somewhere else, you've got to do that now. All other things being equal, there is virtually no way that at 30 years old, you're going to be as attractive to as many men as you are at 20 years old. And that's just...
And I think you're sugarcoating it even. So, like, I have an even more extreme view of this, significantly so. I've heard the fertility argument. A lot of evolutionary biologists will put this forward, and I don't know if I buy it. I think there's a whole heap of men that would gladly marry a super attractive woman who was absolutely infertile. And it would be, if they really wanted kids, it's easier for a guy to adopt kids and be open to that than a woman, because there is no real biological experience for the guy, except making the baby. But that's a different topic. Whereas for the woman, there's an awful lot involved in being pregnant and then having the child and then breastfeeding and all of that. It's a very physical and mental process. There are a lot of hormones involved in that. But one thing that very few people talk about, as much as it needs to be talked about, is that very tightly coupled relationship between fertility and estrogen. Guess what else estrogen does? It makes you look young and pretty if you're a woman. And if you Google an estrogen chart, it doesn't start dropping when you're 30. It doesn't stop dropping when you're 40. It starts dropping when you become a woman. There are other things that you could talk about, like eggs over time, and that's actually coupled to estrogen because of the way that it's produced. But there's a biological argument for this that goes far beyond even attraction. So we talked, you came from the fertility angle. I've taken it over to the attractiveness angle. It goes even further than that. And this is something actually posted on X today, a long post about this, the sheer ignorance of people when it comes to basic female biology. And it's funny because in the last 100 years, common knowledge of other medical or biological factors has gone through the roof, where a lot of people have a lot of understanding about a lot of topics. But because that co-occurred with the rise of feminism, there's this huge blank spot in common knowledge, even among women, when it comes to things like menopause.
Exactly. And I would say there are a lot of women that are in extreme denial about this, because you'll see on X, when you post things like this, the amount of women screeching, that's not true. I know so-and-so who had a baby at 42.
Arguing the exception, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, my girlfriend Methuselah, she had a baby at 400. Yeah. Okay, fine. But then don't cry when you're 32 and you can't have a kid, right?
Exactly. And I will say for every couple that has a healthy child in their early 30s, I will trade you another. And like I said, I worked in a hospital. I've seen them who are told by their doctor, okay, they've just gotten married at 29, 30 years old. They're just starting to try to have children. And they come in and find out, okay, you're infertile. If you had started trying to have children when you were 20, there might have been treatments we could have done that could have fixed this. But because you've started at 30, 31, there's very little we can do for you other than say, sorry, you're infertile.
And it, like I said, it goes so much further than fertility. And we're talking averages. There's always exceptions. If you are a woman and you wait till after 30 to have your first child, the amount of energy that you have for that kid is so depleted compared to if you had your first kid at 20 or 22 or 24. And honest people will tell you this. Honest women will tell you this. But like you said, there's an enormous social pressure to lie about these things, or at least not talk about them. And there are a lot of factors as to why, but one of them is that women who do the wrong thing and make the wrong choices, they don't want to feel guilty, so they'll just lie about the truth. And
exactly. And getting back to the same, whether it's in church or elsewhere, they've already learned if they make a mistake, it must be a man's fault. It must be my father's fault. It must be, the guy who strung me along, or my ex-boyfriend.
Yeah, no one told me.
Yeah, somehow, some way, they will never conclude that it's, well, I shouldn't say there are some women who thankfully do come to learn and take responsibility, but by and large, modern women will never conclude that they're at fault because they've been taught all their life they can't possibly be at fault. Which does bring me, I do want to bring up next I think the most telling response in all this. Now, I'm going to preface this for all those watching. Micah, or Base Zillennial, the ex-user that initially spawned this debate, she has blocked me and made clear she doesn't want to talk to me anymore. Do not go harass Micah or post on her after this. But I am bringing up what came up in that conversation that ultimately got me blocked because I think it is important. And that is that. So Micah was a user on X who was very emblematic. She's not unique, but her posts are very emblematic of where a lot of young Christian women are today. She posted, "I'm single and I've been single for 9 years. I can't take it anymore. When is enough enough?" She posted that all the good men are already married. She posted that I dated a guy once who was everything I was looking for, spiritually, emotionally, everything else, but I just wasn't attracted to him. Sorry, can't help myself. I got to marry someone I'm attracted to. And, stop telling Christian women to do this or that. It's really not helpful. But more or less, she's concluding she wants to get married, and she's very unhappy about this. She posts about it a lot on X, but she won't conclude that her standards are too high or that she might be doing something wrong. It's all about how men need to get up and work harder to earn women like her. And I challenged her to debate me on this on my podcast here. She initially said she was interested. I have screenshots that prove as such. We went back and forth by email several times, trying to agree on a time. She kept backing out of it. Ultimately, she told me, "I'm sorry, I just don't have time." To which I responded, "Well, that really means you just don't want to do it because we all have the same 24 hours in a day. You're saying you're using your time for other things." And finally, after a couple back and forth, she said, "You're a creep," and blocked me. Now, because of X's blocking, it used to be that if someone blocked you on X, you could never see anything they posted again. But thanks to Elon's new rules, if someone blocks you, you can still see what they post publicly. You just can't interact with, or otherwise post on it. So I was able to see that after she blocked me, she did retweet our conversation. And for the kick of it, I started looking through the responses that all her followers were giving to her. And uniformly, not one of her followers addressed any of the points I made. Instead, it was that my 2 cents, he's just an unattractive incel who lives in his mother's basement. He just wants to date you and he's angry that you won't date him. And then the next one, "Oh, these unattractive guys just keep telling on themselves. You go, girl. Micah, God has someone for you." And over and over again, it was all about how my 2 cents is an unattractive incel who lives in his mother's basement and is just angry that Micah won't date him. Now, I can't help but point out, I never asked Micah out. Not once. I got the I have all the
You're lost,
detailed
buddy.
all the conversations. And frankly, I don't want to date you, Micah. This is just, I'm just throwing that out there. I do not want to and would not be interested even if you were. But I think the point here is when faced with when women are actually, when this is actually brought to their attention, when it is suggested to most women in the modern age, have you considered that maybe you are the problem, not the men who you want to date but don't want to date you, or the men who want to date you but you don't want to date? They just uniformly screech at that and then conclude that, strangely, that the person who's criticizing them must be a super, super unattractive guy who's just mad that no one will date him.
Yeah. Or if you say, hey, 18, 19-year-olds are more attractive than 30-year-olds on the whole, people say you're a pedophile. That's a very unreasonable response. But zooming out from this particular young lady, or anyone in particular, women in particular, zooming out, I think society as a whole, we have a real problem with being unreasonable today. It's a huge problem. It's a very big problem. And if you ask me, I think Christians should be known for their willingness to consider ideas and work through things and discover truth and to love truth more than anything else. Jesus said he is the spirit of truth. And you think that that would be important to all of us. But unfortunately, we're known for the opposite, which is to be amongst the least reasonable people. The most, you could just go to the definition of faith that people use, which I don't agree with. But to stay on point here, society has a huge problem today with reacting emotionally to what are rational points. And to this lady's credit, I think it's wonderful that there are women out there who are morally mature enough to avoid marriage or any kind of a long-term relationship with a guy that they're not into. I think that's a mature thing, to prefer to be alone rather than, I don't want to say trick, that's not the right word, but kind of co-opt a person into a relationship where that guy wouldn't sign up if he knew how little interest she had. There's that guy, what's his name? James something or another. Maybe Sexton. He's a famous divorce attorney, does podcasts and things.
I know what you're talking about. The name escapes me at the moment, but yes.
Okay, yeah, he's an interesting guy to listen to, but he said, hey, something like, most guys have never actually dated a woman who was actually into them. And if you meet someone who's actually into you, as a man, if you meet a woman who's actually into you, she'll move heaven and earth to spend time with you. It doesn't matter what you're doing, and it's so obvious that she just thinks the world of you. And I agree with him. Most men have never had that. And if they knew that was out there, they wouldn't settle for less. We come back for settling. They'd prefer to be alone. And I think it's great that there are women out there who already have that standard to say, look, I'm not going to chain myself to somebody who I'm not really into. But what's missing is the follow-up. It's a 1-2 punch. So the second punch is to say, and I prefer to be alone. And this gets back to the beginning of our talk here. Instead of saying, oh, God has Mr. Right planned for me, and I'll have everything I want for the exact price that I want it. And usually, here's a tidbit of advice. In life, you can usually only have either what you want or what you're willing to pay to get it. It's almost never the case that you can have what you want for what you're willing to pay. You can pick the path or the outcome. And once you pick that, you're usually going to have to deal with a form of the other thing that you don't want.
Exactly. And I think getting back quickly to the unreasonableness of society's responses, I just feel compelled to point out that I find it interesting that, especially when it comes to criticizing women's dating decisions or relationship decisions, the go-to response is always, the guy criticizing me is ugly and unattractive. Because that strikes me as, one, let's suppose for a second that that's true. Every guy who criticizes you is just ugly and unattractive. I mean, effectively what you're saying is that I only value the opinions of attractive people, which I don't know about you, but I've known a lot of attractive people who weren't very smart and some unattractive people who were very intelligent. So I just think about this is an example I often give. I had a math professor in college who just was I've called a lot of people ugly, but this guy was kind of ugly. He was extremely overweight. He had spoke with kind of a lisp.
So what you're saying, he was a math professor?
Yes, he was a math professor. Yes, and he was what I would consider to be a very ugly individual. However, the guy knew what he was talking about when it came to calculus and differential equations and everything else. And I imagine how absurd it would be. And I know this is kind of an extreme example, but suppose a college student sitting in his class one day, as he's handing back your paper to you, or your you just took and you got an F. If the student stood up and said, "Oh yeah, professor, well you're ugly," and it's like that's your response, and to which everyone would immediately see, okay, maybe the guy is ugly. But does that mean he doesn't know what he's talking about when it comes to math? And does it mean you didn't fail the test? Yep. Absolutely not. And the same kind of goes here. At absolute best, even if it is the case that every person who criticizes a woman ever was just a really, really ugly person, that ultimately doesn't have anything to do with whether or not what they said was true. So if you really believe what they said was off base and totally wrong, why didn't you address it? And it's always telling. People tend to lead with your best foot forward. If you can refute an argument, they will refute the argument. I think it's often said in law, if the arguments are good, pound the arguments. If the arguments are bad, pound the table and pound it hard. And the lesson being, the louder and angrier and more off base people are getting with their insults, the more likely it is they know you're right and just can't refute it.
Yep. And we've lost that as a society. We don't use that as an indication anymore. And that's a shame.
All right, well, we're at about 46 minutes here, so I'm going to go ahead and near the end of the show here, I like to look back through the comments and see if anyone has any questions or anything else worth addressing here. So if you're watching the podcast, please, if you have a question for Rob or myself, go ahead and put it in the chat now. In the meantime, I'm going to take a look here and see what kind of discussion we've got going on. First, J.A. Thatch has given you a shout out. Anyone who is not familiar with Upward Thought, I highly recommend his channel. As do I. Mr. Merchant says, the real issue with dating and marriage and the current state of gender dynamics, regardless of if you are religious or not, is that no one has taught this stuff and no one talks about this being a problem. I'm inclined to agree. Again, it's not so much that no one talks about this stuff, but again, I feel like in their youth, people are being given objectively bad advice. And if they do come to realize it, it's only once it's too late, especially for women who, again, because women, unlike men, have much more of a timetable, they might, whether they admit it or not, they often realize around age 30, 31, they should have made better decisions when they were in their early 20s, but by then it's too late.
I think if I could chime in on that one, I think part of the problem here is fear. The people that know are afraid to say, right? Either they're ashamed to say, if it applies to them, or they're afraid to say. I actually made a video specifically about this. I think it's called something quite inflammatory, like men stop making your wives into monsters or something. Okay. But pastors are really guilty of this too. Pastors will beat around the bush and not talk about the real problem with particularly female sin, because they don't want the Karens on their church boards to fire them. It's a huge problem. And this goes deeper and you get into the laws of the rules in the 501c3, but it's a huge problem. The people that know don't say because they're cowards. And it's a real shame that we don't care about other people who aren't that far in their lives yet enough to tell the truth. And there are consequences. You can get in a lot of trouble for saying it, but it's important.
Absolutely. Star Raptor Flock says there's going to be a large population of lonely, infertile millennial women who were lied to when they were young, and it will be a sad trend. Unfortunately,
and Gen Zs.
Yep. And Gen Z, I can't say I disagree. And much like Rob said earlier, I feel like this is, as far as our efforts to stop this, it's more of a Noah's Ark situation. I mean, the culture is on a trend. Family law has...
This is going to be a holocaust.
Yes.
I haven't seen anyone, even Elon Musk doesn't talk about how big of a problem this is. There is going to be an entire generation or two, maybe three, who are lonely women who are single without any kids.
Yeah. And the best we can do is educate those few individuals we have influence over, hope they make right decisions, and those few that get off the ark afterwards can rebuild society thereafter. Seth Gutton says, Mom 6 here, had babies in my 20s, 30s, and my earlier 40s. Easier pregnancies in my 20s, celebrating 26 years of marriage on Monday. Well, congratulations, such relationships. And my grandmother had 11 children, and she is, she recently passed away at 96 years old. The amount of people with stories like that are getting fewer by the year. So it is good to hear that. Layla, so glad I had 4 kids all in my 20s. Listen to reason wherever it comes and take responsibility for your own choices, women. Absolutely. Sheer amount of Captain Pipsqueak, sheer amounts of mutual sabotage that some women do is insane. Can't say I disagree. Then just a few more. Seems you still there?
I'm here.
All right. If anyone can still hear me, it appears we might have a connectivity issue. Did the link come through? I can't see it. Here it is. Rob, are you still there?
I'm here. Yep. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yep. I can hear you. I think might have had a connectivity issue there for a second. I don't know what everyone else was seeing. I guess I'll find out when I watch it again afterwards. But Sally says, originally I was planning on getting married after graduating college and serving a mission, but life plans changed when I met my husband in college and got married at 20 and had a baby at 21. Again, good for you. Layla, okay, so Lana, I guess, is that how you pronounce your name? It looks like you tried to share a link. No, it did not come through. That might just be, I'm not sure how the comment bot is set up, but it might censor links. So if you're looking to share a link to something, just state the full name of it, and we'll see if we can get a link in the comments when the comment section of the actual YouTube video when it ceases to be live. And then finally, Mr. Merchant says, I just say counter, provide arguments or evidence, or concede, admit you're wrong or give up. And I think he's talking about you're ugly defense there.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm going to steal that.
All right. Excellent. All right. Well, that is all the comments. And we're getting close to the top of the hour here, so I'll go ahead and cut off the discussion there. Oh, wait, here we go. Lana says, Wisdom and Womanhood by Cindy Hughes. Very well. I'm sure if anyone Googles that, you'll probably find it. So, Rob, thank you again for coming on the show. And I'll just give you if you want to do a quick outro, remind everyone where your channel is, what they can find there.
Yeah, this is my X tag is upward_thought on YouTube. You can find me at the same without the underscore, Upward Thought. I also have a website, upwardthought.org.
All right, awesome. And again, one more reminder, as for Micah, the base Zillennial, again, I feel sorry for her that I wish she had come on the program to have a discussion about this. I think there's a lot that could be learned. That being said, she chose to block me and said she doesn't want to talk to me. So if you're watching this, please do not go harass her. The information is out there if she wants to find it, but I'm not going to talk to someone who doesn't want to engage. So as always, thanks everybody for watching. Hopefully it'll be a much less of a hiatus between now and our next show. A lot going on in the world that I would like to discuss, but this is definitely an important one because, as I said, I really believe when it comes to societal ills, whether we're talking about economic, political, or whatever else, a lot of it begins and ends in the family. If your families are strong, your society will be strong. If your families are weak or they're not forming at all, your society is going to be weak. And unfortunately, I see that happening more and more. So I hope everybody here learned something valuable. And as always, that is my 2 cents. Take it for what it's worth.